weekly Mac Forum video chat. We are getting ready for the September 18th edition, and I want to start by welcoming our newest member, Bim Bam, and all the new members who joined this week. Welcome to the forum. Hope that you find yourself some interesting information. We are trying a new system for broadcasting the show this week. If it does not work out, I'll re-record the video and put it up directly as a QuickTime format video tomorrow. But let's get right on into the night's discussion, because we got quite a few things on the agenda here. First of all, as I said, we want to welcome our newest member, Bim Bam, and you can see there on the screen we have the list of active members, number of active members, and let's get right on into this. First one that I wanted to bring, a relatively new member in terms of posts, someone who has been a member since October of 2012, member Tiskers, is a little bit annoyed about the calendar search function in iOS devices. And the problem that she pointed out in the thread is something that I had not really thought of, and that is, if you go through the iOS calendar and you're searching for, say, a prior event, you're only going to see about 2 years worth of information. Even if you back up to roughly when you thought the event had occurred, you still only see about 2 years worth of information, and sometimes that doesn't help, especially if you don't remember exactly when the event might have been. And there are a couple of solutions bandied about in the thread. A couple of forum members contributed, but Tiskers came up with a solution that I had not realized, and I used calendar regularly on both the iOS and Mac platforms. And her solution is, if you're running calendar on your Mac and on iOS devices, and you need to search for an event going back, say, more than 2 years, what you want to do is do that search on the Mac, if at all possible. It will show you those older events, assuming that you have told your sync function to keep those events in place. Okay, so let's move on to that one. I think shout out to Tiskers for providing that information and essentially solving her own problem. If you know of a better solution for this, please post it in the comments, and we'll be glad to pass that on in a future show. All right, as you know, iOS 10 has come out along with the iPhone 7, and one of the changes in the iPhone 7 is that they've replaced the traditional home button, which you've had on the last several iPhones, in favor of a button that uses that haptic touch similar to the trackpad on the newer Macs. Now, that's not a problem except for one thing. On the old phones, if you needed to, on the older phones, even up through the 6 and 6 series iPhones, if you wanted to force your phone to reboot, you held down the home and sleep wake button for about 10 seconds. This doesn't work on the new iPhone. Give me 1 second here, folks. I'm going to shut down drag and dictate, because that's what's causing the screen to scroll there. But anyway, what you want to do with this is the way around this, there still is a way to force reboot the iPhone 7, and that is, what you're going to want to do now is to hold down the sleep wake button and the volume down button simultaneously for about 10 seconds. Okay, and if you remove you do that, you'll be able to reboot the phone. This change is necessary because that haptic touch button just doesn't give you the same functionality when it comes to reboot that you had with the previous type of button. All right, and that's a change in the hardware on the iPhone. Let's move on to something else, iPhone related, or I should say iOS device related, and that is the ability to remove certain built-in applications in the iPhone. Now, this is something that we have not had before. Whenever you had to remove an Apple app in the past, you've had the ability to remove apps in the past, but you've never had the ability to remove an Apple app in the past. And you can do that now under iOS 10. What you want to do to be able to make this work, if you'll remember the same procedure that you used for deleting rather, third-party apps, where you tap the app and hold until it starts to wiggle and an X appears. Now, in previous versions of iOS, if you tapped on the X, it would delete the application, but that did not apply to Apple apps. Well, now you will see an X on some Apple applications, such as Mail, and if you tap there, you will be asked to confirm that you actually do want to remove that app. And you're getting rid of the app and its associated data from your device. Now, there are two caveats here that I want to be absolutely certain that I mentioned. I want to thank Jim Tanos over at Tech Review, as you can see from the heading of the article there. This is something that you need to be aware of. First of all, when you delete one of these Apple apps, you're actually hiding the app in the sense. It's not. This is not going to be good if you're trying to save space, if you're running out of space on your device. This is not the way to do it, because essentially what you're doing is hiding the app from the user interface. So let's say that you use something different for mail. You use a different mail client, and you don't want that mail icon taking up space. You can move that or delete it. Now, it doesn't actually delete it. What it's doing is hiding it. And the way to put it back is to go in and re-download it. Search for it in the App Store and re-download it, because it's now going to show up as one of the apps that you can re-download. And I'm going to have a thought or two about that in a minute when we get to the closing of the show. But this article, I didn't, in the show notes, I'm going to have this in the show notes, but I didn't cover everything in the show notes that's in this article. It's a very good read. One of the things that I did not go into a great deal of detail in the show notes is it tells you which apps can be removed, which ones can't. You can't, for example, remove the iPhone app, because that's what the actual phone, the one with the phone icon, because that's what governs and controls a lot of the phone functionality on the iPhone. But it's a very good description of what can be quote-unquote removed, what can't, how to protect your data. One way to do that is to make sure that you're backing up your data to the iCloud, so that way it's still there and safe if you ever need it off of your iOS device. Okay, just get one more click in here. And I want to be sure also that I mention to you a couple of other things. You'll find that site is very good for information about iPhone related problems and things like that. I have not really spent a good deal of time in the last couple of weeks talking about changes to Sierra, which is the upcoming OS 10 release. I'll be doing that in the very near future. Okay, and one thing that is not up here in my summary, uh, for some reason it's not appearing on the screen. I must have accidentally closed that tab. Before we move off of the iOS devices and issues, and I'll have a link to this in the show notes. If you are considering, with it being iPhone season, there are a number of people who may be considering a move to an Android device, moving away from the Android device to the iPhone. There is a way to move a lot of your information relatively easily from the Android gizmo to the iOS device. And the way to do that, I have a link to an iMore article that talks about an app that Apple has in place to help people who are moving from the iPhone, from the Android device to the iPhone. It'll help in moving over a lot of data. So I'll have a link to that in the show notes. I have not used that app personally, but it seems to be well liked. I have used a different app. I believe it's called Android File Transfer to help some of my friends recover things from their iOS, from their Android devices. And I'll put a link to that as well. It's fairly straightforward. I don't know if it would work entirely well for moving to an iPhone, but it should be helpful. So I hope you find that link helpful as well. And then one of the other things that I wanted to talk about just real briefly tonight, Kirk McLaren, aka Kirk the iTunes guy. Those of you who are regular listeners know that I visit Kirk's site relatively frequently, the Kirkville site, and he has an idea, or rather has a review, if you will, of some of the new features in iTunes 12.5, some of the interface changes. Won't go into a lot of detail here, but it's a good overview if you would like. And keep in mind, he is a real good source for various tips and tricks for just Mac use in general, but particularly when it comes to music, quality of music, and especially with use of iTunes. If you want Kirk to if you want to be able to listen to your music with good quality, then Kirk is the place to go for a lot of helpful information there. And we had a few rough edges tonight there by closing up that one window, but that's okay. What I wanted to pass on to you now is just a couple of thoughts. Sometimes I include these at the end of shows, and sometimes I don't, but I want to be sure I add something tonight. I was thinking about the procedure for deleting Apple's apps from iOS 10. And something occurred to me. I have been accused by some of my Windows using friends as being one of those Apple can do no wrong kind of fanboy types. And they might be right in some cases, but people who have been around me for a little while will tell you that I occasionally disagree with something that Apple did. I've been an Apple user since the days of the Apple II, and I was gobsmacked when they discontinued the Apple II GS. The only thing that hastened my transition to the Mac was that by the time they killed off the Apple II line, the behavior was very similar to the Mac, so it was an easy transition for me. And the alternative was transferring over to Windows 3.1 box, and I wasn't about to do that. Okay, so and there have been some other times when I've disagreed with Apple, and here's one that I kind of hope they, how do you want to put it, adapt, tweak, adjust, however you want to call it. The procedure for deleting uh, the Apple apps that you can delete in iOS 10 is pretty straightforward. It basically mimics the procedure that we've been using for a while to delete third-party apps. That's not the problem. Um, the problem that I have with this is two things. One, I think we're still at a point where a lot of users will delete things thinking that it's going to free up a ton of space on their machines. I don't think that's well understood at this point. When you say delete, most people think that means remove it, get rid of it. So I think what we need to do is to make that a little clearer as to what exactly is happening. And the second thing is kind of a procedural change, and that is I really would like to see, if you're going to just hide the app rather than actually delete it, then maybe there's a better way to restore it than to have to go through and re-download it. I'm thinking in terms of those folks with limited data plans and or slower Wi-Fi when they get home. I realize that the last couple of incarnations with the iPhone and with other devices, is not just iPhone, but with other devices as well, seem to have the approach of assuming that the user has a large data plan. That's not true for everybody necessarily. And I realize that when they develop these features, they kind of have to think of ways that a lot of people would use. But I really would like to see, the one change I'd like to see in that little procedure is some other way to restore the app as opposed to just going in and re-downloading. And as I say, you do have to be careful about where your data for a specific app is stored, because if you haven't backed up the data, when you move it off of the phone, the data associated with that app, when you hide the app, the data goes with it, as far as I can understand. So that's my little mini rant for the week. It's a little bit shorter show than we've done in the last couple of weeks, but that's okay. We kind of rushed to put this one together. Everything seems to have gone well, and we will see how this works. As I say, if this did not work real well, then we'll put up a MP4 edition tomorrow with a little bit more heads up and same content essentially. As usual, I'll have the show notes up shortly after the show. It'll have links to everything that we talked about, and you'll find that information very helpful, I hope. And that's going to just about do it for this week, folks. I had a couple other tips in mind, but wasn't able to test them as thoroughly as I would like to. So we'll put those in the hopper for next week. And until then, this has been your host, Sylvester Rock, aka Sly Dude on the forum. I've been glad to have you with me, and I hope that you will join me next week. If you have a comment about improving the show, feel free to post it in the there's a thread in the community announcements section about the Sunday chat. Just post it there, and if you have a question, I'll try to respond to it. You can also put a question in the notes at the bottom of the stream, and as I say, the link to the show notes will appear there as well. It should be up within about an hour or so. So until next week, thank you for joining me. This has been your host, Sly Dude, and I'll see you in the forum.